Greg Jeffries enters professional baseball as a two-time minor league player of the year in 1987 and 1988, a distinction that places him among the most closely monitored prospects of the decade. The Mets promote him at age 20, and he immediately produces a .321 average in his 1988 debut stretch, which convinces analysts that his contact skills will transfer cleanly to major league pitching. Because the franchise is balancing a veteran-heavy clubhouse, still carrying the expectations of the 1986 championship core, Jeffries arrives as both a spark and a potential disruption. His rapid ascent, therefore, heightens internal pressure, as incumbent infielders see their roles compressed. The early data high batting average, consistent zone coverage, and fast bat speed suggests a long-term cornerstone. Yet the team's competitive window intensifies scrutiny around his development. By 1991, the optimism turns sharply. Jeffries posts a .258 average that season, and the crowd at Shea Stadium responds with frequent boos, which reflects the widening gap between projected production and actual output. Veteran players publicly question his maturity and report surface of locker room confrontations that further erode his standing among teammates. Because off-field friction often correlates with on-field inconsistency, the tension becomes a persistent narrative that overshadows his remaining value. The Mets ultimately trade him to Kansas City, a move that signals the club's decision to reset expectations rather than invest further in an unstable trajectory. What this transition reveals is how quickly a prospect's arc can reverse when environment, performance, and perception no longer align in imbalance that sets up the next prodigy's unraveling. Todd Van Poppel enters professional baseball as the top pitching prospect of 1,990, a right-hander whose fastball regularly touches 97 miles per hour and generates national attention before he throws a professional inning. Because the Oakland Athletics fear losing him to college, they offer an immediate major league contract, a decision that accelerates his development timeline and restricts the club's ability to option him freely through the minors. This structural limitation becomes clear by 1993, when Van Poppel posts a 7.6 ERA during his rookie stretch and struggles to sequence pitches against experienced hitters. His slider, projected to complement the fastball, never reaches the consistency scouts expect, and opposing lineups track the pitch early in counts. The organization therefore faces a widening gap between prospect projection and practical performance, a pattern that grows more pronounced through the mid-1990 seconds. By 1996, command issues dominate his outings, as walk totals rise and first pitch strikes fall well below league averages, which forces Oakland to reassess his long-term role. The club demotes him that season, a move that effectively ends the next Nolan Ryan label and underscores how early contractual decisions can influence player pathways. Van Poppel's trajectory illustrates the risk of accelerating arms before they develop secondary pitches, because the modern game increasingly demands variation, precision, and late movement. His decline also reflects a broader shift in organizational strategy, as teams begin re-evaluating how they manage elite high school pitchers in an era defined by rising velocity. The pattern of stalled development sets the stage for the next prodigy, whose promise unravels just as quickly. Breon Taylor enters the Yankees system as the No. 1 overall pick in 1991, a left-handed high school pitcher whose fastball routinely reaches 98 to 99 miles per hour. Because his agent, Scott Boras, negotiates one of the largest amateur contracts of the era, Taylor becomes a benchmark case for high-value pitching prospects and the expectations that follow. His early minor league data supports the investment. Strikeout rates track well above league averages, and hitters struggle to square his velocity even when he misses spots. The Yankees therefore map a steady progression toward the upper levels, expecting him to reach AAA by 1994 and the majors soon after. His profile youth, velocity, and market leverage places him at the center of the franchise's long-term rotation planning. That trajectory collapses in December 1993, when Taylor tears the labrum in his left shoulder during a bar fight, an off-field incident that immediately alters the physical foundation of his pitching mechanics. The injury reduces his velocity by more than 10 miles per hour, and because labrum repairs of the early 1990 seconds produce low recovery rates, his command deteriorates sharply once he returns. Taylor never pitches above AA, and his final minor league line closes with a 6.08 ERA, a figure that reflects both mechanical degradation and diminished confidence in his secondary pitches. The Yankees ultimately remove him from their depth plans, and the organization pivots toward college-polished arms in the seasons that follow. Taylor's decline becomes one of the starkest examples of how a single injury can erase even the most secure projections, leading directly into the next failed prodigy's unraveling. Jesus Montero enters professional baseball as a 2009 top 5 global prospect, a right-handed power hitter whose minor league slugging percentages remain above .500 for multiple seasons. Because the Yankees view him as a middle-of-the-order anchor and a long-term catching option, they invest heavily in refining his receiving skills, even as defensive metrics continue to lag behind organizational expectations. His value peaks in early 2012, when New York trades him to Seattle for Michael Pineda, a deal that reflects both Montero's offensive ceiling and the club's long-term pitching needs. Seattle immediately promotes him into an everyday role, expecting his contact rate and raw power to stabilize a lineup that ranks near the bottom of the American League in run production. The transition, however, places him in a ballpark that suppresses right-handed power, a structural factor that becomes more evident as the season progresses. By 2013, Montero's production falls sharply, and he finishes the year with a 208 average that triggers a mid-season demotion because the organization can no longer justify his defensive limitations behind the plate. His conditioning becomes a recurring issue, and the ice cream sandwich dugout incident when a team employee delivers food to him during a game intensifies questions about discipline and professionalism. Meanwhile, internal evaluations show declining agility metrics and slower pop times to second base, making it increasingly unlikely that he will remain a viable major league catcher. Seattle shifts him toward a first base and DH profile, but the reduced defensive value means his offensive line must rebound dramatically to keep him on the roster. Montero's stalled progression therefore underscores how conditioning and defensive strain can narrow a prodigy's path, creating the conditions that shape the next unraveling in this sequence of failed prospects. Ricky Romero enters professional baseball as the 6th overall pick in 2005, a left-handed starter whose college track record at Cal State Fullerton convinces Toronto he can anchor a future rotation. His early major league seasons show steady improvement, and by 2011, he posts a 2.92 ERA across 225 innings, a performance that earns him an all-star selection and positions him as the franchise's most reliable starter. Because his walk rate remains manageable, and opponents hit only 219 against him that year, Toronto structures its rotation around his workload expectations for 2012. The organization also views him as a stabilizing force during a period when the team struggles to stay above 500 inches, the American League East. His success, therefore, creates a clear benchmark for internal development and future roster decisions. The pattern reverses immediately in 2012, when Romero records a 5.77 ERA and issues 105 walks, the highest total in the league, which signals a sudden breakdown in command. Mechanical analyses show inconsistent release points and reduced confidence in his changeup, a pitch that previously offset his average fastball velocity. Meanwhile, knee and elbow issues surface throughout the season, and because he continues pitching through pain, the injury spiral accelerates the decline in both control and pitch quality. Toronto attempts multiple interventions, side sessions, mechanical resets, and brief rest periods, but none restore pre-2012 stability. By 2015, the club designates him for assignment, and his major league career ends abruptly, marking another case in which injury-driven command loss reshapes a prodigy's arc and leads directly into the next unraveling in this narrative. Dominic Brown rises through the Phillies system as one of the most athletic outfield prospects of the late 2000s, and by 2011 he becomes the No. 1 overall prospect in baseball, according to multiple ranking outlets. Because Philadelphia is transitioning from its 2008 championship core, the organization views Brown as a long-term middle-order fixture who can offset aging curves elsewhere in the lineup. His breakout arrives in 2013 when he posts 27 home runs, a 494 slugging percentage, and earns his first All-Star selection while carrying the club through a strong May and June stretch. The performance reinforces internal projections that his blend of power and zone coverage will stabilize over time, particularly as his hard contact rate ranks among the league's best during that period. Philadelphia, therefore, increases his everyday workload, expecting the 2013 model to represent a sustainable baseline. The data shifts dramatically in 2014 and 2015, when Brown's average dips below 230, and his isolated power falls by more than 1/3 compared to his All-Star season. Mechanical reviews show persistent timing issues, especially in his lower half, And because his stride length and bat path vary from week to week, coaches struggle to implement a consistent corrective plan. Meanwhile, opposing pitchers adjust by attacking him with higher fastballs and low and away breaking balls, sequences that generate weak contact and rising strikeout totals. The Phillies, navigating a broader roster decline, cannot afford to wait for a reset, and by 2016, they move on from Brown in favor of younger, more adaptable outfield options. His trajectory demonstrates how a single spike season can mask underlying instability, creating a transition point that leads directly into the next failed prodigy in this progression. Mark Prior reaches the height of his career in 2003 when he records an 18-6 record, a 2.43 ERA, and 245 strikeouts across 211.1 innings, placing him among the most efficient power pitchers in the National League. Because the Cubs rely heavily on both Prior and Kerry Wood during their postseason push, analysts begin questioning the sustainability of that workload, especially for a 22-year-old still adapting to major league recovery cycles. The concern widens after his September collision with Marcus Giles, a play that forces an awkward landing on his throwing shoulder and briefly interrupts his late-season rhythm. Chicago continues to push for innings as the club chases its first World Series appearance since 1945, a decision that magnifies every mechanical stress point during his starts. His dominance remains intact through the 2003 postseason, yet the cumulative workload establishes the conditions that define everything that follows. By 2004, Prior begins experiencing shoulder inflammation and structural instability that cause multiple disabled list stints, and his pitch efficiency, once a defining strength, declines as hitters adjust to reduced velocity and flatter vertical movement. Medical evaluations reveal recurring rotator cuff and labrum complications, and because early 2000s surgical outcomes for these injuries carry low return to form probabilities, the Cubs must adjust their long-term rotation planning. Meanwhile, Prior's strikeout rate falls year over year, and his innings totals shrink to the point that Chicago can no longer project him as a dependable frontline starter. Although he attempts several comebacks, mechanical adaptations fail to restore his pre-2004 command profile, and he never returns to his 2003 level of dominance. Prior's collapse becomes one of the clearest cases of workload intersecting with injury risk, providing the structural lead-in to the next prodigy, whose career unravels under similar pressures. Jurickson Profar becomes the No. 1 global prospect in 2013, a switch-hitting shortstop whose minor league track record shows advanced bat control, above-average contact rates, and defensive versatility rare for a player his age. Because Texas anticipates a seamless transition to the major leagues, they begin planning around his projected value, expecting him to stabilize the middle infield as veterans approach arbitration and free agency. That timeline ends abruptly when a significant shoulder tear wipes out both the 2014 and 2015 seasons, forcing him into a multi-year rehabilitation process that delays his development during his age 21 and age 22 years. Meanwhile, internal data shows declining arm strength and slower defensive transfers, reducing confidence in his ability to return as a full-time shortstop. The Rangers therefore confront a structural shift. Their highest valued prospect now carries a physical profile that no longer matches his original projection. When Profar returns for his first full season, he posts a 204 average, and underlying metrics confirm a diminished hard contact rate that limits his ability to impact the ball from either side of the plate. Because his throwing shoulder remains a concern, Texas moves him across multiple positions, converting him into a utility player whose versatility compensates for the reduced offensive production. This adjustment stabilizes his roster value, but simultaneously closes the door on the superstar trajectory once expected from the top prospect in baseball. Subsequent attempts to revive his bat swing path modifications, timing resets, and role-specific adjustments yield only incremental improvements that never match the hype surrounding his early career. Profar's path demonstrates how a single injury window can reshape an entire developmental arc, providing the bridge to the next prodigy whose rise collapses under a different set of pressures. Byron Buxton becomes the No. 1 prospect in baseball in both 2014 and 2015, a rare back-to-back designation that reflects his combination of elite defensive range, high contact rates in the minors, and top-tier athletic measurables. StatCast later records his sprint speed at 30.6 feet per second, the fastest in Major League Baseball at the time, which reinforces Minnesota's belief that he can control entire outfields and generate extra bases on routine contact. Because the Twins see him as a foundational player who can accelerate their rebuilding timeline, they promote him aggressively, expecting rapid adaptation to major league velocity and sequencing. Early struggles against breaking balls widen the development gap, yet his defensive metrics remain exceptional enough to secure everyday playing time. The organization's entire long-term plan centers on the assumption that increased plate discipline will translate into sustained offensive value. That breakout appears in 2018, when Buxton finally begins producing above league average power and contact quality, but repeated migraines and a wrist injury derailed the season before those trends fully stabilized. The pattern repeats in 2022, when knee and hip issues limit him to 92 games and force extended stretches at designated hitter, reducing a key portion of his on-field value. Because Minnesota cannot project him for full season availability, they restructure the roster around contingency plans, including defensive specialists and rotational platoons designed to absorb prolonged absences. Meanwhile, his production profile becomes defined by volatility, elite power spikes, long stretches of inactivity, and persistent questions about durability. Buxton's career ultimately acquires a consistent tagline, "if healthy," a qualification that frames the transition into the next failed prodigy, whose promise collapses under a different form of instability. Joe Borchard enters professional baseball in 2000 after signing a $5.3 million bonus with the Chicago White Sox, the largest guarantee ever awarded to an amateur player at that time. Because he is a switch-hitting outfielder with notable raw power and a successful college football background at Stanford, scouts project him as a rare multi-sport talent whose athletic ceiling could translate into middle-order production. Chicago accelerates his path through the minors, expecting his bat speed and strike zone strength to refine quickly against professional pitching. Early minor league seasons show intermittent power spikes, but his contact rates fluctuate sharply, creating an early discrepancy between output and projection. The White Sox nevertheless preserve a long runway, believing repetition will close the skill gap as he approaches age 25. When Borchard reaches the major leagues, the production never stabilizes. Across multiple call-ups, he records a 205 average with 12 home runs, and by 2004, his strikeout rate rises to 37%, one of the highest among American League outfielders that year. Because swing and miss trends widen rather than narrow, the organization adjusts his development plan, introducing mechanical changes designed to shorten his bat path, but these interventions produce only marginal improvement. Meanwhile, his football background encourages speculation that a return to the sport could offer a clearer opportunity window, especially as Chicago reduces his playing time. Borchard retires from baseball soon after and briefly pursues a professional football career, marking another case in which elite amateur pedigree fails to convert into long-term major league value and setting up the transition to the next fallen prodigy in this narrative.